modern submarine. It was Germany that established itself as a leader in sub-technology throughout World War I. Germany sought to counter Britain's superior navy by going underwater, developing an Unterseeboot, or U-boat. Initially, submarines stayed relatively close to the surface and near ports, but changes in strategy drove them great distances at 200 to 250 feet below the surface, moving at speeds of 8 knots underwater and approaching 15 knots on the surface, making them more aggressive weapons. By 1918, the Germans had a fleet of 44 U-boats of various sizes, from 24-person short-range coastal subs up to massive 1,500-ton U-cruisers with a crew of 60. The Germans also worked to perfect the torpedo, a weapon that would make their U-boats lethal. Compressed air or heated gases were used to power a turbine inside the torpedo. The torpedo improved its speed and accuracy over the course of the war. The turbines enabled torpedoes to extend themselves, achieving greater range and speeds of up to 24 knots, or roughly 35 miles per hour at longer distances. They were packed with TNT or gun cotton and could be set for depth and proper direction.
Submarines also had deck guns for targets that were either alone and unable to defend themselves, and it was cheaper to shoot them with an artillery cannon and sink them that way than it was to expend a torpedo, which was fairly expensive.
U-boats sank more than 6,500 Allied ships over the course of the war. One lone U-boat sank 224 ships. But the key to the submarine's advantage was not its firepower.
Its primary weapon was stealth. It couldn't be seen. You gave that up only at your own peril.
The biggest danger a U-boat faced was a depth charge, a bomb set to go off at a certain depth underwater. The Allies attempted to use depth charges against U-boats, but their stealthiness made this a challenge. But the Germans weren't satisfied sinking only Allied ships. They realized that if they were to win the war, they needed to strategically attack supply ships, even if they were from so-called neutral countries.
There was also a major debate, they shouldn't be torpedoing these vessels because they are commercial vessels after all. The German says, right, what you're bringing in on these vessels are going to be shot at me later on because you're bringing in war materials. So as far as we're concerned, these are warships.
Logistical targeting of supply ships nearly won the war for the Central Powers, as the Allies were cut off from outside supplies. But it angered neutral countries, like the United States. America finally entered the war on the Allied side, after German U-boats sank a number of American and other non-combat ships and passenger liners. The most famous of these, the British passenger liner Lusitania, was almost certainly smuggling materiel for the Allies.
The use of unrestricted submarine warfare brought America into the war, and the fresh soldiers who arrived in France in 1917 and 1918 were the decisive margin of victory for the Allies. So the weapon that almost won them the war ultimately cost them the war.
Though both sides realized the same advantage from the new technologies, and the soldiers certainly helped, it was American manufacturing production that pushed the Allies over the edge. American raw materials were virtually limitless, and American supplies enabled the Allies to outlast their exhausted enemies. Because World War I was a laboratory for destructive technology, warfare changed drastically between 1914 and Armistice, November 11, 1918. Even as the soldiers were celebrating the armistice, the dark clouds of the next conflict were already gathering. Some historians claim that World War II was simply a continuation of one great global war that began in 1914. What is undeniable is that the seeds of technically efficient destruction planted during the First World War would bear bitter fruit in the coming conflict, and on an even larger scale.